someone who was raised on the land of the Day-Kitan, because racism isn't just a Black thing; it's an everybody thing. And I just think that discussions are really important, particularly the way that our country and pretty much the world seems to be going lately. And I just think that we're not going to learn anything if we don't talk to each other, and that it's really time to bring back civil discourse and try to talk to each other. We don't have to agree. We just have to agree to try to learn from each other. So I just think that these discussions are super important, and I appreciate the offer to be here.
Thank you so much, Heather. Jocasta?
Hi, thank you everyone. I am Jocasta Olp. I am also calling in from Denina Land. I decided to be a participant and accepted to be a participant on behalf of the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce. I'm also on the board of the Alaska Black Caucus with Leroy, but I thought I'd keep it a little bit more narrow focus on the chamber and the business practices, especially since one of the main topics is around the economic pieces and talking through that. So I serve as the diversity coordinator for the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce. So coming from that perspective, and maybe throwing in a little things regarding to healthcare, since that has a huge economic impact and disparities too. I am a pharmacist, and so speaking from that lens as well.
Thanks, Jocasta. Jasmin?
Hi, my name is Jasmin Smith. I have been in Alaska since I was 4, so I'm pretty much lifelong Alaskan. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I own a couple of different companies, and I do a lot in the community. Organizational wise, I would say that for this conversation, I would be with Alaska Black Chamber of Commerce, but I'm excited to be able to speak from an entrepreneurial and a business owner color standpoint. So I'm happy to be part of the conversation. And I am also on Denina Land.
Thanks, Jasmin. And you just got a big thing with your business, right? You had a big announcement that about Baby Vend. I don't know if you want to share.
Oh, yes. So we have a vending machine coming to Mall of America. So I'm super excited. We have a baby supply vending machine company. So that's one of my entrepreneurial hats. And I can't wait.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. Nelta.
Hi, great to be here. Nice to meet everyone. I'm also calling in from Denina Land. My name is Nelta Edwards, and I teach sociology at UAA. And I mostly teach classes on inequalities, so race, class, and gender. And I'm super interested in this conversation. I'm always interested in the way that inequalities don't emanate from individuals, but that they come from systems and policies and things that we have set up historically that advantage certain people and disadvantage other people, and that they remain hidden from us because we're a very individualistic culture. And so I'm super excited. I'm used to talking, to my students who, do the assignments I ask them to do and read the things I ask them to read. So, but I'm super excited to be here with members of the community and hear about the things that you're working on.
Thanks so much, Nelta. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to be part of the conversation. So the ways that racism can impact people financially or economically can be really wide or varied. Can you each give me an example or two of a way that people can be economically impacted by racism? And we'll start with Heather.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, there's a million ways. So in planning for this, I said, well, let me speak within the lens of my job at the municipality. And part of what I do at the municipality is I run a program called the DBE program. It stems back from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but to put it very, very simply, basically, it has to do with federal funding and the fact that the government is obviously run on people's money, people's tax money. And the idea of it is that that money being put back into the community should be readily accessible for everyone. It should also benefit the entire community. So the DBE program, which stands for Disadvantaged Business Enterprises, Again, I'm going to way oversimplify it because it's a federal government program, so it's not simple at all. But basically, it's to make sure that smaller or quote unquote disadvantaged business enterprises, or those that are run by historically disadvantaged persons, or people from ethnic or racial groups that have historically been disadvantaged, have an opportunity to equally participate in projects or construction. Generally, it's in the form of construction or professional services contracts, that they have an equal opportunity to participate in that. We all know that, and it's not a terrible thing, it's just the way that it is that generally those that are well established, they have a long history, maybe they've been in business longer, maybe they're bigger, maybe they've had more opportunities, or they're able to do the job more quickly or more cheaply because they've been in business so long. They're going to get the contracts, or they've always worked with them, so they're going to get the contracts. And the idea is that we want to make sure that other people, and especially smaller firms, have an opportunity to participate in those projects. So to get to the actual question, you were talking earlier about the book club, and that you were talking about, the history of racism and older times. And again, it kind of goes back to, if your business was established a long time ago at a time when people of color weren't allowed to have businesses, or weren't allowed to own property, basically weren't even allowed or had the same opportunities for an education, to get the jobs, to get the money to start a business, and all the funding and all that part. So it started a long time ago with unequal opportunities, to where now the majority of the largest firms in America are not run by people of color. So when the larger firms, or the historically successful firms, those that have already established that relationship with the government, are getting those contracts because they had those opportunities back in the day. And as it comes forward into the future now, or into the present, a lot of people are like, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. I didn't do, it's not my fault my business is successful. It's not my fault I'm doing well and they're not, and it's not about fault. It's about opportunity. And it's about, how can we help to bring other people more opportunities that they weren't afforded because of racism, even if it was 100 or 200 years ago. So yeah, I'll leave it at that because it's long-winded and there's other people, but it just kind of is really important to understand that it doesn't always have to be current day racism that is affecting people in their lives, in their jobs, in their businesses. It's historic. It's the way that it's embedded into our culture and our society that continues to affect people today.
Thank you so much, Heather. Jocasta?
Yeah, I'll echo what Heather said. So thinking through it, some key things that we've seen both in Alaska, but I would say across the U.S. And some practices. The first thing that comes to mind to me is just the Black wage gap, and what we see in that perspective, and the loss of income to invest for building up wealth over time, and that those lost wages there through racism and discrimination. And again, echoing Heather, how there's a through line from the higher education piece, and not being discriminated there, and not being able to be quote unquote qualified for those, those positions or jobs, and going in that sense. And then there are more of the systematic pieces, like not having fair and equitable lending habits. And we see that from a historic standpoint to today, when in thinking through some of the things like PPP loans that we saw with COVID, and how, it's still happening today, and the disparities and the access, especially for entrepreneurs, to get that lending, getting that capital, from not knowing about the sources, not being told later on, and that word of mouth that doesn't get to people of color, all the way to the artificial intelligence that's screening some of these applications lending, and the built-in racial biases that are a part of that. in that system. And then thinking about from that historical standpoint, just that idea of home ownership and that building up of wealth and the Jim Crow era practices that were put in place, the redlining practices that were put in place for that, moving to today where you still have, neighborhoods that have archaic clauses about, actually having a person of color being, able to own that home, having individuals discriminated against for being in certain neighborhoods and looking at houses. Even, there were recent lawsuits regarding one of the online searches, one of the kind of the popular searches for homes that were having discriminatory practices for the homes that they were actually showing available. And so all of these suppressive pieces that are still happening today that are limiting what I would say wealth, and really getting to that next level and being able to have that sustainability in generations to pull ourselves up, that American dream that we're told we can get, but it's not quite there for us. So, so I'll leave it at those kind of four main pieces for now.
Thank you, Jocasta. Jasmin?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with a lot of what Heather said and what Jocasta said, in the ways like racism has impacted economics. I think like that overall theme of if you don't have access to the potential for wealth and funding, how can you maximize your potential? How can you afford to own a house, or how can you afford to go to college or put your kids through college? And of course, things that I think about like as an entrepreneurial standpoint is, and I guess it might be a theme for later, but, other economic impacts of racism goes down to like the rate of pay. I think that's a huge one. And like, Jocasta said, that pay gap and having people understand what does that mean? People getting paid less than that, or women less than of color, over justification of why you charge what you charge for a contract, or your contract getting paid less than someone else's contract. And what the background story is for why your contract is valued at worse if you're the one doing it. So yeah, I think they summed it up pretty good, but I would piggyback off of that and just kind of add, it shows up in, like Heather said, procurement ways, and then like what Jocasta said, in pay areas as well.
Thank you, Jasmin. Nelta?
Yeah, these are all super great and, but terrible. Too bad we have so many examples of the economic impacts of racism. One thing that I've been interested in, because I teach in higher ed, is the disproportionate way that public funds are distributed toward education. So there was a really great study looking that the California Faculty Association did, looking at the higher ed system in California. So they have community colleges, the Cal States, and then the UCs. So those are the ones we know, like UCLA and Berkeley and Davis. And so there's a ranking in terms of prestige. But what I didn't realize is there's also a ranking in terms of how much public funds goes to each institution per student, right? And so what happened, not just in California, but in the history of the United States, is that there was a big push towards higher ed during the Great Depression. There was lots of public monies spent on that, but it was mostly white students. For all of the reasons that people have pointed out, historical racism that went. But then as particularly, the GI Bill, African Americans weren't really able to use that, although they were eligible for it, weren't able to access that in the same way after World War II. And then during the civil rights movement, people were saying, like, look, we have to spend more money more equitably. And what happened is that all of a sudden there was a pullback on public spending for education. So what the study concluded is as the student population got browner, the funding got lighter. Right? And so they estimate like a huge number of public funds that would have to be spent to bring up the spending on students of color to match the public spending for white students. And so I think that's another economic impact of racism, because if you're a white student and we're used to, in a white supremacist system, the spoils going to white people, and that I just lost my train of thought. We're used to the spoils going mostly to white people, and that when they're not going to white people, right? If we're saying like, oh, we need a step up program, right? We need something that'll produce some equity, then it has to be explained all over the place, that we all get used to. And, you know, at my own university, right, I'm starting, you know, you see that programs are special things that mostly contain white students get funded without question, and programs that serve students of color have to be defended.
Thank you, Nelta. Leroy.
Okay. I'm going to read mine. It's easier. Again, I'm going to go back to my roots as someone that was born into the segregated South of a single family, dirt poor, and with only the willpower of my mother to have her children finish school. That's her goal. In this place that I grew up, there were also white kids, children on the farms where I was living, the managers of the farmers' kids. And sometimes we even played together, primarily because if we didn't, there wouldn't be anyone else to play with, except maybe your sister or brother. And that could be a drag. You had to do it for most of your life. But if we played together during the day, we never visited each other's home or ate in the other's house. Boundaries were set, and you know where they were. These kids, if the white kids, if they were old enough, they also worked on their parents' field and earned their keep. But come the 1st of September, when the school started, the white kids would be getting on their buses or in their parents' vehicle and traveling to their assigned school. Many of the black kids, however, had to continue working, gathering the later crops of vegetables that matured in the fall. However, my mother, with her life's goal of seeing her kids through school, made sure that we only missed about a month of school, even though we could have used the extra little bit of money that our extended work period would have brought in. However, there were some other black families that found it necessary to have their kids work in the fields until after the Christmas and New Year's school recess, meaning that they missed out on about 3 or 4 months of school. Now, even though it's possible to apply effort and catch up with the others, with only a month absence, it became nearly impossible for those other kids that had to miss 3 or 4 months of school and to then catch up with their classmates. So there were no school councils and a plan set up to address this situation, at least not in the black school that I attended. So ultimately, these kids would end up failing their classes, being kept behind, and restarting again late the next year. As you might imagine, you would have kids that were 11, 13 years old in 3rd grade. And yes, the other kids would tease them, call them dummy, 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 as expected. These older kids would drop out of school, ending up just hanging out around the black gathering places, doing a downward spiral into joblessness, homelessness, crime, alcoholism, and drugs. The bottom line is that a lot of potential doctors, scientists, pilots, businessmen, and women walked out of the doors of that schoolroom for the last time, never to realize their potential to achieve what might have been their greater destiny in life, and possibly contributing to the betterment of humanity and society as a whole. I'm certain that those white kids, though, who started their classes on time were provided with the best that the system had to offer at the time. And they were a lot more successful in life than were the kids that were in my neighborhood.
Thank you, Leroy. Appreciate you sharing from your own personal experiences. And I appreciate all of you kind of tying together both history through to the present, because we often can see those through lines of how something can impact us now, even if it happened hundreds of years ago or 50 years ago or however long. I was hoping that each of you could help us see how these issues are manifesting in Alaska. And I think you all touched on it a little bit, but if you want to give some more specific examples, that would be great. Jocasta.
Yeah, so I think here, and I just wanted to go back to one point too, because I thought it was powerful that Dr. Edwards said, because it was kind of the first time I thought about that as the justification of funding. Um, I thought that was interesting because I went back into my mind palace here and was thinking about me in school, which I'm from Tennessee originally, and how growing up the programs and thinking about TAG and how that was uh, in my county. TAG was primarily for like the talented and gifted, and it was more white students there, and the funding that went into that, and never hearing it challenged or competed. But then the magnet program, which was really benefiting children of color, had to justify, you know, every action, every field trip, everything like that, and the burden of proof there, and you felt it as a child. You couldn't quite articulate it, but you felt that piece of it where you just had to like justify existing and being able to, always prove yourself there. So that really spoke to me. um so going back to your original question around like what we're seeing here in Anchorage and in Alaska overall. So definitely seeing a lot of these things resonate. We are definitely not shielded from any of this, from discriminatory practices, from uh, and when I say that too, it's not always so blatant. But some of the things are just the fact that we don't have the laws that have caught up with things. So things as simple as still being able to ask for employment salary history and some of those things, and what do we do with that space? We still have where healthcare is so intertwined and connected with your employer, and just the economic burden of that piece of it, and the situations that people will put themselves into from a job standpoint just to get health care. It's not always advantageous for them from their, stepping up on the ladder or taking those risks from, going and stepping into the entrepreneurship and doing that, where to really thrive in that space and get to that next level of wealth. Um, Also seeing it from just how we disseminate information about jobs, about grants, about those types of practices. We I joke about it sometimes and saying how we're, 5 years behind, but it is to our detriment in some of those standpoints because we are still a very word of mouth. It's your neighbors, your friends, and even if you post something on something like Facebook, the algorithms work against you because it's going to be in people who share your same algorithmic viewpoint. And, I don't know about you, but my feed looks more and more like my little cosm. And so, if it's someone working at the city or the state that is a white person and they post and they're getting that information out, it's shared with people who are going to look like them. And, we see that typically in your neighborhood, your neighbors look like you, your doctors look like you, the people you interact with kind of on a daily basis kind of look like you. And that's just limiting. And so it's not even, dispersing that way. So some of our practices and our habits here are causing that. And knowing that at the chamber, trying to think through other ways that we can disseminate information and thinking through other mediums, not just for race, but also across generational gaps too of color as well. Because, some people, I never thought I would say it, but print, is still key here and really getting that out, where if you have, an older individual who's still very much a part of the economy and a part of this entrepreneurship that might not be, tech savvy, social media tech savvy, they shouldn't be limited because of that. So there's still those opportunities there. So really thinking innovative and out of the box. And we have, a small community, we have that opportunity to make some inroads there. And we just need that collective push to get to that space. So those are some things specifically that I see in our great state.
Thank you, Jocasta. Jasmin, you're next, and we are working on the back end to figure out how to spotlight your video again.
Oh, no worries. I turned my camera off temporarily because it's the bandwidth. So I'll just speak this answer, but I'll turn it back on. So when I think about, I guess, racism and what that looks like in this experience here in Alaska, for me, one thing comes to mind, and that's the sense of invisibility, or it doesn't happen here and it can't happen here. So like I mentioned earlier, I was raised here. Alaska is pretty much all I know. My family's originally from Savannah, Georgia, and I talk about that quite a bit. And that made for two totally different experiences in a Southern rooted family, but then also being raised in Alaska, and not just Alaska, but going to schools like Eagle River Elementary and Gruning Middle School and Chugiak High School, where there's only a handful of people that are brown. So, I think we have the same problems, in terms of like systemic racism and having that be a barrier and becoming a problem in economics. But I feel like Alaska is just coming to a place of having an honest conversation and saying it's real and it exists and it happens. I think if you are someone on the receiving end, you see it and you know that it's been here. But I do think like these conversations about what that looks like and how it manifests and that it really exists here. And no, Alaska's not different is oddly new. And again, I just speak to that in terms of like business and leadership. Who is at the top? Who has those leadership positions? Who's decision making? What percentage of people are approved for the home loans or approved for business loans and grants and things like that. So I think, again, just kind of summarizing it, we're just getting to a place that I've noticed to have larger conversations, not only about the issues of it, like contemporarily, but what we can do to address it. But if you were raised here and you kind of grew up here, I kind of feel like you either came out of it with everything was fine and I never saw it and it was great, or you seen it and you knew it was happening, but because it wasn't discussed as much, there was this sense of you're crazy. That's not what you think you're experiencing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense, Jasmin, and really resonates with me also having grown up here in Anchorage. So thank you for sharing. Nelta.
Yeah, I just completely agree with Jasmin and Jocasta saying that this notion that it doesn't exist here is false, that it certainly exists here. So one thing that we deal with is homelessness in Alaska. And I think that the racial makeup of the homelessness and that our inability to get to solve that problem has everything to do with race and racism. And I've been sitting here thinking about if I was going to say this or not, but I decided just to say it. So we just hired a chancellor at the University of Alaska, Anchorage, and there were 8 final candidates. And 6 of them had been people in academia who had done the work, who had gotten, who had been through the academic, through to full professor, and then getting to be an assistant dean and a provost, and had professionally worked their way up. And the person who got the job had no qualifications, has never been in academia at all. And he was the white guy. And so that is the most prescient for me example of how that still works right here in Alaska, is that someone who hadn't even been working toward that, right? We had including 2 women of color in the pool who had been working toward that position, toward a leadership position at a university, step by step by step. And somebody else who's been a lawyer and a politician gets the job.
Thank you, Nelta. Leroy?
Okay, again, I have to call on a lot of my life's experience in order for me to try to understand something. I try to go all the way back to the beginning, because you don't have a mountain just form. I think probably 1 grain of sand started out to get that mountain. But In Alaska, the impact of poverty, racism, and discrimination has had a devastating impact on especially the state's indigenous or First people. From the arrival and takeover of the first white settlers to the church's role in helping to destroy original culture, the state's First people have seen full blown and felt head on the devastation of poverty, discrimination, acculturation, and the loss of culture. Lands taken, subsistence rights denied, physical assault, the introduction of alcohol, drugs, and being socially stigmatized by white society have all acted to mount a devastating and ongoing effect throughout the generation. My most memorable recollection of outright racism and discrimination against the First People is during the construction of the pipeline. The well-paying job that this project created were given first to the workers who were imported from Oklahoma and Texas. Why? Well, because they were the people who had all the oil field experience. Racism and discrimination? These workers were primarily white. They had gained their experience by being able to train and work in the oil industry in those states, working with their entitlements to places in that industry and hierarchy being passed down through fathers, uncles, and other relatives who were also white. So when First People or other people of color applied for openings, they were informed that they did not have the desired experience or skills needed by the contractors for those positions. And those contractors automatically hired their relatives, friends, and friends of those they knew. The shell game continued until the AFN and other Native corporations intervened and demanded that training programs be set up and training slots, like apprentice level paying position be set aside for the training and hiring of First People. Well, it seems like this was the same way that it had been done down south with these folks that were coming up. And it seemed to work well in the oil companies being able to now find local folks to hire for the position. So when they weren't getting the job, they weren't getting the money. It has an economic impact.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leroy. Heather?
I just want to point to the chat if Dr. Edwards hasn't seen it, and then also personally just thank you for sharing that. It's difficult sometimes, most always, to speak up, and I really appreciate you sharing that story because a lot of times it takes a lot of courage to point out things that we, in general, quote unquote, we, meaning society or whoever is perpetrating this stuff, wants to just walk over it or pretend like it didn't happen. And if you don't say something, it continues. So I appreciate that. And I also want to appreciate what Mr. Williams just said, because I was thinking along the same lines of the First Peoples and we are, this is the month of Juneteenth, and we're celebrating Juneteenth, and we're very engaged in what that means to people of color, Black people. But in Alaska, racism has been perpetrated against the people who were here first. And it again, as I mentioned, I was raised in an Athabascan village, Dekatan village, and it molded me. It made a difference to me. It is very important to me. A lot of people are like, "Are you Alaska Native?" I'm like, "No, I'm a Native Alaskan though." But they welcomed me. They made me feel like I was a part of the village, and I call it my home. And so when I see the things that are happening to the First Peoples, it is heartbreaking. The homelessness, the lack of jobs. I will take a page from Dr. Edwards and go ahead and talk about my work and the lack of representation in contracting, in municipal employees, of the people who were here first. And it is a problem. So this idea that, racism was a long time ago and racism doesn't matter anymore, we're all equal, I don't see color. These are important concepts to talk about. And that's why these discussions are so important. And I think that civil discourse is so important because it's not a blame game, and it's not a shaking of the fingers and talking about us and them and how all these terrible things happened. It's learning and talking about it and trying to learn from each other to understand what's actually happening and how we can make things better for everyone. One of the things, again, I talked about the DBE program, and it's almost the same as, like, people look at it like, oh, it's affirmative action. And then people don't like it because then you have people that are like, well, now I'm a white person, I'm being discriminated against because you can't say I'm going to hire this person because they are a person of color or that sort of thing. And the point of it is that it's not, you don't hire someone because of their race ever. You don't. You find qualified candidates and you the best effort, number one. And number two,
She cut out after number 2 for everybody else.
I wasn't sure if it was me or not. Okay, Heather, I don't know if you can hear us, but we've lost you. Hopefully you will make it back to us soon. Okay, thank you for speaking up. I think it was Pat who spoke up. Thank you. We really appreciate that because my internet is shaky. I didn't know if it was me. So I'm going to go on to the next question. Maybe just give 1 minute just to see if Heather pops back in. But I really appreciate how you all have sort of brought us sort of through historical contexts to the present and to our state here in Alaska. And I'd like for us to move now to talk about what work is currently being done to address these issues. So I am going to go ahead and start with Jasmin.
Awesome. Yeah. So, current work, there's so much I don't know where to start, but so there are many programs that are taking place. I can speak to some of the work that we're doing. So I live in Mountain View, and I have a co-working space over here in Mountain View called Emoji Co-working, and which is Swahili for Unity. And the whole goal of that co-working space and incubator space is to just develop and talk about all things entrepreneurship and all things economics. I think, other programs that are happening right now, especially in the BIPOC community and our communities, is trying to amplify, our businesses and opportunities and really show that we are professional people. There are opportunities to grow professionally your career track and, be financially independent. We've been doing a lot of work with accessing dollars and funding. And, I will say that in the work that I do, that's very, very important to me, letting people know what's available to them and letting them understand that although historically we have been taught that it's an unobtainable thing, wealth and being comfortable and, this idea that we can get ahead. I think there's been a lot of great programs from, Set Up Shop and others from the allied communities within our own community that are addressing the concept of helping communities that have historically not had equal access to funding and opportunities in terms of professional development and business development. So, in my small area, we're really passionate about accessing capital and supporting entrepreneurship and business development because successful businesses can hire and, that leads to jobs and growth opportunity there. And then the last thing I would just mention that is, currently happening is, again, diverse and historically underrepresented communities working together to showcase and amplify their businesses. So we made an Alaska Black Business Directory, which has been going really well and acting as a good connector for information and kind of helping other diverse communities create their own as well. And then, just working on constant access of information and teaching people how to access those dollars for their business. And how to grow their business to whatever levels they want. So I could ramble about that all day. I love all things entrepreneurship and empowering each other to start and grow successful businesses.
Thanks so much, Jasmin. And I popped links to the Umoja co-working space and the Black Business Directory in the chat. So if you want to learn more, follow those links. And Heather, we lost you right when you were going into your point number 2. So I don't know if you remember where you had left off, but if you'd like to jump in and kind of finish up what you were saying, please do so.
Honestly, I don't know where I cut off, and I don't really remember exactly what I was saying. I think everyone that went before me did such a splendid job, but I was just saying that, well, honestly, everybody spoke to it. It's still a thing in Anchorage, and I think that the opportunity to have these discussions, because who was it that was? Oh, Jasmin was speaking to growing up in Alaska, and it is such a difference. And Jocasta also made me laugh when she said we're 5 years behind, because that was always a joke growing up, but it was more like 10 or 20. We were always running behind. But it's not an excuse anymore because of the internet and the things that we have, but we have to educate each other. We have to have these discussions. We have to talk about it so that we can understand that it is a thing. Alaska is not unique. In fact, in a lot of ways, Alaska is running behind. We need to acknowledge what's happening and attempt to move forward. So I'll just cut that, because I think you went on to a new question. Did you?
We did, yeah. Yes, we did. So we are now kind of pivoting into what work is currently being done to address these issues. And so Heather, if you want to just jump in on that, or if you want a little bit more time, I can go to someone else first.
No, I'll jump in right behind Jasmin, because I like jumping in behind Jasmin, because we do a lot of work together. And one of the things that we are working on is, again, what I was just speaking to, which is education. We are trying to plan some workshops and help. There's a lot of small business help in the community. There's a lot of different entities that do that work. So particularly through the Office of Equal Opportunity, we're trying to work on educating small businesses on how to do business with the municipality, how to get onto the vendor registration, how to learn about the contracts that are available, how to make yourself more appealing or more ready to do business with the municipality. So I think that that's a big thing that we are trying to do. And I think that it's not unique in the way that we're trying to do it, but it's important the way that we're trying to do it, because we want to make it accessible to everyone. It's not, again, to the point of we're just trying to pull up specific businesses to get these contracts. We're not pinpointing businesses and saying, okay, you're going to get one. It's not a set aside. The municipality doesn't do that sort of thing. The municipality is trying to make available education and training and funding. Also, is one of the projects that we were just working on, was how to get more data so that we can see what exactly the municipality is doing, so that we can make more opportunities available for the smaller businesses in order to get themselves into a position to do better and have those contracts. Because as Jasmin pointed out way in the beginning, procurement is a big deal. And procurement basically being the municipality spends millions and millions and millions of dollars within the municipality. So just as I was talking about the federal government monies earlier, the municipality monies should be a benefit to all of the people within the municipality. And so educating small businesses how to be more ready for those contracts is an opportunity that that we're trying to work on, to make sure that they have exactly the knowledge that they need, and also to get the data to know what opportunities are available, so that in the future, young people coming up can say, hey, the municipality is always needing such and so, whether it's employees or contracting opportunities, so that you can put yourself in a place to be ready for that.
Thank you so much, Heather. Nelta?
Well, I like to follow both Jasmin and Heather. Gosh, I get kind of excited about business, which I know nothing about, just hearing the two of you talk about it. And in terms of work being done to address these issues, I'm at the university, so we're trying to give people critical thinking skills so that we can think about race and racism and inequality, and basically, how to build a better society. And so I'm super excited to be here with you guys talking. And I really thank the library, Meneka, and your work in heading this up. It's really fun and important to get to talk to people who are doing different aspects of addressing this problem. Work being done to address these issues. I think a lot of people on this panel are doing, in their own little corner of the universe, really super important work. And I'm just so happy to have an opportunity to hear about it. And my mind is like going a million miles an hour. As Heather was talking, I was thinking about, the municipal funds, because I just moved and they're putting in a new park. And I thought, oh, I wonder if anyone's ever done any studies about who gets most access to parks based on social class in Anchorage.
That's a big question. Maybe one of your students can investigate.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nelta. Leroy.
One of the things that I see happening, and I think is beneficial, like the formation of groups and individuals that are sharing the same goals and objectives, and that's of trying to make effective changes in the system, and in turn, they're getting to know each other. First person, meaning removing the middleman. I happen to be fortunate in having friends from a diverse group of ethnic groups and things like that. And some of the things that I asked them was, what do you know about Black people? And not only what you know, but how did you learn it? And I'm finding out that most of the things other groups know about Black people, they got it from white people. And I said, well, a lot of white people I know don't even know a whole lot about themselves, let alone knowing about me. So maybe you ought to make the effort to get to know some Black people and vice versa. And I've told that to Black people too. Don't come telling me about them and whatever, unless you've made effort to find out about them, their culture, and an understanding. You don't get it through the person that's been trying to keep you apart for ages, divide and conquer. So that's what it is that trying to get individuals together with same thought, same mind, same purpose, to work for the same goal. She just mentioned, and I forgot her name, works for the city, about the program that they got there. The caucus has also realized that one of the most important things that can be done in this day and age is to get information, is to keep information is a resource. I know that's said a lot, but one of the things that we're working on is trying to set up a resource center. And she she's a resource, I didn't even know it existed, so that businesses and individuals that want to get information about how to get involved can do that. I discovered, and I have to be upfront with this, in Alaska, a lot of time it's not that quote, quote, they are keeping things away from us. It's just that we're not making ourselves available for some of the opportunities. Sometimes you got to get up at 7 o'clock to be at a meeting. I know that, I've been there. But it's not comfortable if you're not used to it, but you got to. You have to try to find out where the information is, where you need to go to get into that system of things, so you can be there when you need to. You can't write a grant, or you can't get the information when they tell you the grant is due in next week. You must have already gotten that, know about the process, so that you can be eligible and ready to submit your application. If it never gets submitted, you're never going to get any kind of money from it. So we're starting to make that kind of inroads and everything. It's just because information is important, and our efforts to try to help people of color get involved in the system is just part of the process that we're working on and doing.
Thank you so much, Leroy. That's really exciting to hear that the Alaska Black Caucus is working on that. And so we look forward to hearing more about that resource center as it continues to develop and grow.
Yeah.
Jocasta?
Yeah, so one thing that I'll talk about from kind of a different perspective, because a lot of good things have been said. So with the Anchorage Chamber, what my position entails and some of the work I've been doing kind of comes in a different space and looking at this. So thinking from the chamber, from a historical standpoint, very white, large corporations, and kind of dismantling that framework and mindset, but also knowing that we do have those entities within our organization really changing hearts and minds and moving some of these individuals, leaders, companies from being very passive on the subject, on some of this, and doing that in action, not being necessarily suppressive, but just neutral and in that space, and getting them to that allyship standpoint. And it starts with having frank and honest conversations with these individuals, and then for some going very, very business like, and creating that business case around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and showing the dollars lost for the whole, and why it is so important, and doing that, and having to start from some inroads there, and also creating that common language where they can speak on this and start to understand it and speak authentically around it. And so doing that piece, and then once that happens, they start to have honest conversations like internally with their businesses about their histories, and I've seen it happen time and time again, where they start, they do that, and this is from that top down approach. You have some of these companies that have grassroots efforts. They might have an employee resource group here or there, but really trying to get into that top down approach that can make widespread change within an entire company, and also having these businesses be very crystal clear on how they're measuring diversity, how they're measuring success, how they're measuring who they're hiring, and then once they see it and it's really clear to them, how they're going to improve it. And providing that resource to them, like what does the ideal candidate look like, and and did they have the same opportunities? Are they going to have that glowing reference from, your friend of friend, that whole good old boys kind of club, and just making that go away? Are you basically doing forced practices first because it's not infused, it's not in your culture? So you're going to have to practice. You're going to literally need to have a action item for diversity almost, because it's not there yet. You don't have that. And I don't think we don't have to fault those individual or those organizations for having to do that, because it's getting done. Over time it can infuse and can be a part, but if it's not on that list, then it's not being said at all. So just like letting people know it's okay to start somewhere and having that, and so making that inroads. So doing a lot of coaching in that space, where people are feeling comfortable of like speaking out and being leaders where it's appropriate for them to really kind of push through, especially within their industry, and having that practice. So I'm starting to see that. We've been doing this for about 3 years now, and getting to that place where it doesn't have to, always be force upon individuals, but I'm starting to see some shifts there. It took us 400 years plus to get here. So, in 3 years, I know it's not gonna, change overnight, but just seeing some efforts there from that kind of corporate allyship, which I think has the potential to be powerful, because it just takes a few really, and the rest will follow when it's not the status quo to be indifferent. And turn a blind eye to these things that we all know are so true in there. And so that's one of the actions that I see that's being taken, and that is happening kind of in this space, to try to chip away at all of those years and decades of disparities that we've kind of talked about.
Thank you, Jocasta. Thank you, all of you. I really appreciate hearing about the work that's happening. It definitely gives us a little bit of hope as well as we move forward. My last question from myself is, well, before I go to my last question, I just want to encourage everyone who's here today, if you have other questions, please pop them in the chat. And we have still a little bit of time, so we'll be able to answer those in just a few minutes. My last question for you all is what work still needs to be done? And if there are things that the people in this room could be doing to help move the needle on these issues, this would be a great time to share those things. So Nelta, we'll have you go first.
Well, I just feel so enthused listening to Jocasta talk and being so hopeful about the business community. But I just want to say there's a big backlash coming, right? So there's this whole thing about critical race theory. And basically it's that, it's people in power saying, don't talk about race, don't talk about the history of racism because it makes me uncomfortable. And we can't all get along if y'all keep bringing that up. And anyway, what you said, they're the people who we would have never learned about the Tulsa, the Black Wall Street massacre, right? If they had their way, we would just quit talking about it. And so I think what work still needs to be done is that those of us who care about living in a more equitable society are going to have to steel ourselves for the backlash that is coming and continue to hold each other up and support each other. As I think that this, I don't know if it's going to be a tidal wave or just a little high wave for us. And so hopefully we can continue to get together and work on that.
Thank you, Nelta. Leroy?
What's the question again?
What work still needs to be done? And if you have suggestions for people here in the room of what they can be doing to move the needle on this issue, what might those suggestions be?
I think she just mentioned about the tidal wave back. I get so tired of, I get so tired of the white supremacists, the conservatives in this country, always wanting to not hear about things that they have started, they have caused the problem of, but yet when it comes time to acknowledge it, then they don't want to hear it. I mean, what group of people would be going around wearing hoods and masks, disguising themselves if they thought what they were doing was proper and correct? And the next day, they're in behind the counter at their shop and everything. So I get tired of the racism that's there. Black lives matter. Well, all lives matter. Well, why didn't you say that before? I'm just getting tired of it being picked on and everything, and having to respond to it. But I do see hope in the younger people that are getting involved because they have interacted with each other at an earlier age and earlier stage. And they know each other as people. They either like you because you're a jerk, or they don't, not because of the color of your skin. So I guess that's one of the things that I am hopeful is that we will continue to see people get to know each other as people. And then I won't have to go through books and find things like the massacre on August the 14th, 1908, the one on August the 5th, 1896, the one on July 9th, 1910, July 19, 1919. So I won't have to see those things that were done by white people that don't want to hear nothing about how we're treating you. So you can't have it both ways, like I told you, I hate hypocrisy. If you go and buy all those zillions of guns because you want to have open warfare on blacks and people of color, then get on with it. Don't sit there and pretend that never mind. That's my frustration with that. So but I am hopeful changing, and I see folks like are gathered here trying to make an effort. But I just get tired of the same old people out there finding and casting stones at the things that they really are the root cause of, like Donald Trump with the insurrection. And if you're Republican, I feel sorry for you. But anyway, so those are the things that I think are going to be if people open their eyes and they start listening to a wider view of the world of what's going on. And they just don't listen to one source. And even if that source you think is, it's accurate and true, go find another source, double check, so you'll be double sure.
Thank you, Leroy. And if anyone ever needs help finding sources or sources of information, the library is here to help you. Heather, let's move to you.
I love that plug for the library. I love libraries. I think that we've kind of all touched on a lot of the same thing. That I would point out what I think is the most important thing right now is conversation. I think that, we've been through a pandemic and there's different types of pandemics going on. But in my personal opinion, like the biggest pandemic that is threatening the US right now is ignorance. People are willfully ignorant. Like Jocasta mentioned about, social media, and the more you click, the more it feeds into more of what you clicked on. And we're becoming all so silent and encased in our own little worlds and only what we care about and the people that we know and the people that think like us. And I just think that there has to be a real effort to expand. And Mr. Leroy was talking about it as well. Talk to other people. You don't just talk to the people who are just like you. Talk to people who are not just like you, and talk to them with an open mind. In the end, you may find things you disagree. You may find that they're different, but I mean, in my world, different is beautiful. So expand your minds, expand your opportunities, and expand your opportunities to expand your mind. You can't learn anything if you stay in your own box and you only talk to people who agree with you. So I think the biggest thing that remains to be done is to continue to have discussions, continue to have talks, continue to be civil. Because if you're not civil, nobody wants to listen to you. Nobody wants to talk to you. Nobody wants to hear your opinion if the first thing out of your mouth is, well, that's stupid, or I don't like you, or you're a bad person. You can preface it with, well, I think that I disagree, and here's why. And then try to have some sort of discussion. I just think that we need to get back to civility, but we need to get back to being welcoming and being caring. I mean, especially, I love my city. I love my state. We're so diverse. We have so many opportunities to learn from each other. And if we don't take advantage of it, then we will continue to be behind. We will continue to not move forward, and we will continue to have the issues that we're sitting here talking about. And we want to move forward. We want to make progress. And the best way to do that is to learn from each other and try to, I think just civil discourse is the biggest thing that I can encourage people to do. And you don't have to come to these groups. You don't have to speak out. You can talk to your neighbor. You can talk to your coworker. That's a little bit different. And, just say, hi, what is that you're eating? Oh, what is that you guys are talking about? I mean, start with the simple things and make these connections, and just continue to try to reach out to each other. I think that's my biggest wish for moving forward.
Thank you, Heather. Jocasta?
Sorry, I had to have my husband turn down the TV. So I would say work that still needs to be done, and kind of a call to action for the audience. And I would say you could do this if you're in leadership and where you work, or just as an employee, kind of as an individual contributor too, but really taking concerted effort of what your organization's recruitment, their hiring, their retention, and even their firing policies are and habits are. And if you see underlining issues connected to race, speak out about it. I'm always brought back to the concept of the angry Black woman, and like that unfairness within some of these spaces when it's really that individual's presence is what's so triggering, especially when they've been able to climb up. And it even goes back to that idea of having to justify like the funding for tag and magnet schools. It's that, you belong. Something inside of me irks me that you're here. And so performance evaluations are hindered that way, that opportunity for advancement's hindered, not that person being considered not a good partner or a team player or whatever. And it's really the biases that are around that individual. And so thinking through that and being, really looking for patterns there for, is there a white male who is doing the same behavior, attitude, and how are they treated? Or is it a white male who's acting poorly and they're getting pass after pass after pass, and that person probably should be fired? Thinking through that and speaking out about it. And I think, we've talked about this through race, but think about compounding factors for individual and identities too, that could be even more, where it's just added on. So thinking about our, trans brothers and sisters out there too, that's just one thing where if you already have biases against that, one infraction could be their write-up, where maybe like a cis white male gets a pass at that. So really being intentional about that, because it's going to take you to speak out about that, and stepping into that courage to speak out, and do it to who you trust, do it to your HR, but make sure it's followed through, because those things, that bad behavior can't go unstated, or it's going to continue. It really will. And so that's where I say that's an area that work still needs to be done, and even if it has been done, just the accountability of it. If your company has a new mission statement or policy, because I think everyone posted that black square last year. If they did that, hold them to it, and really hold them to it. Like, we need you to do that, and it can be scary, but we need you to hold them to it and not bite your tongue.
Thank you, Jocasta. And thank you for bringing up the concept of compounding identities, because although we are looking through things through a racial lens today for this conversation, we do want to acknowledge that people have been excluded from economic and financial opportunities based on a number of different identifying factors. And I want to mention also that Katie L. brought up in the chat that we can't forget about our disabled communities as well. So thank you both for bringing that up. And Jasmin, I'm going to go over to you now.
Okay. So yeah, I guess it's kind of speaking to, I guess what we want to see moving forward, or the themes that always pop out to me in this world, in this work, is like 3 hopes and desires that I have. My number 1 hope and desire is that we get to this place where our people don't feel like we have to code switch, and we can go into any space, professional or non, and be seen as professional as who we are, from our clothes to our speak, to our hair, because I feel like sometimes that suppression of who we are and feeling like you have to pick one or the other to get to where you have to go leads to a lot of conflicted feelings inside. So I think in this work, when we think about racism and economics, number 1, encouraging people to be proud of who they are and having spaces that support that, even in professional and business development settings. I always tell people, like, a Western thought process is business and personal don't mix, but in Eastern philosophy and old world philosophies, they do mix, because if I don't like you as a person, I don't want to do business with you. So understanding how those two correlate, right? Another thing I think is very important is supporting young people and supporting those middle generations. Like, I'm 35, so I feel grown, but I recognize I'm still kind of in the middle, and allowing people to be who they are unfiltered, because I feel like while people have a voice and they have that power to stand up and address and be okay with the risk of what it is, I don't want to ever make people feel like they have to conform or silence their voice, because that's what it took before to make change, and it's no different now. And then lastly, I think and even in economics and business, I think sense of self is important. And I think it's a fine balance. You know, as a people, I think it's important for us to know our history, because if we know our history, we know where we came from, and we know what's at stake. Now, I caution when I say know our history, you know, me, one perspective as a Black woman, I want to know my history and I want to know what my people went through, but I don't always want to center it on the sad or the tragic or the bad. I learned about Tulsa, for example, because I'm not focusing only on the fact that it was burned down. I'm focusing on the fact that we had a Black Wall Street and it existed before, so it's feasible. So sense of self and knowing where you came from. That's why I love hearing Mr. Leroy speak, because I'm like, dang, he's like living this life that we're acting like only happened in a book. The man is sitting right here on Zoom saying this is what it is. So teaching ourselves, my generation, the next generation, you know, to understand what's at stake. I don't know, I'm getting an echo. Okay, there it is. Yeah. So just to understand, you know, what's at stake and learn our history and learn where we came from and learn from our elders and those that are here. Not just the sad, tragic stuff that happened, but the resilient piece of what we had before. So we understand what we're asking for in terms of equality and equity and economic opportunity is not crazy, and it's not far out there. It was taken away from us for a really, really long time. But if we go back super, super far enough, you know, we had it. And then lastly, I would also do a call to action to allies as well. I think allies are important in understanding your role and what's happening in your path. But there's a fine balance between, you know, allyship and trying to come in and do that saviorness. So I think it's like also that empowerment for our community and our people as well, you know, to also help take this work and take these partial reins for our communities and do what we have to do, and then work alongside with allies, you know, to address, just to address all of this. So.
Thank you, Jasmin. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to open it up in case there are any questions. And you can pop those in the chat.
I had a quick question. Jocasta, I didn't know what that black box thing is that you said everybody did last year and we need to call people.
Oh, yeah. It was after the George Floyd murder. It was a black box that I don't know really where it started, but it was a trend as a point of solidarity. So companies, for that day, they didn't post anything that was supporting their business. They just supported that. They just put that black box, and like celebrities did, and just kind of caught root and caught on and doing that thing. So it was all about the black box, but that was about it with a lot of entities where they just did that. And it was kind of like, not a racist anymore, and just did that part and then made zero changes, policy changes, practices, who they supported, and doing that. So really calling them out where they kind of hitched their ride to a moment. And again, like you see that kind of with Pride too, where it's like they're really, really supportive of the LGBTQ community in June, and it's like, where are you for the other 11 months? So it's kind of that kind of thing where it was a trend and it was cool, but kind of holding them to that accountability. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm gonna just take a peek at the chat. I don't have a question. I have a comment here. So Sharon says, I wish more white people would understand how white supremacist policies are more costly to taxpayers than policies that promote opportunity for everyone. Which I think was definitely echoed by all of our panelists here.
You know, the thing is, because I'm in academia, I always think like, yeah, we just need to do the research and we'll just show it. And then, rationality will prevail and we will make a system that is more equitable. It just doesn't work like that. But nonetheless, I keep trying.
And we appreciate that. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. So I just want to thank everyone who made time to be here today. And I wanted to thank our panelists for taking time to share with us today. I know I learned a whole lot, and I'm sure that's true of everyone else who is here as well. We have a few more events that are part of Anchorage Reads. So on Thursday, June 17th at 6 p.m., we're going to be discussing part 5 of the book, Stamped from the Beginning. And there are 2 versions. There's an adult version that's quite long, and then we've got the young adult version that's a little bit shorter and more manageable to read. And you definitely don't need to have come to any of the other past sessions to join us. So we hope that you will just read part 5 and join us for conversation. So again, that's June 17th at 6 p.m. And in the chat, Stacia is also indicating we have an audiobook that's available for free with a library card through Hoopla. So that's another great option for listening to the book. We also, on June 24th, will have the last of our panel discussions in this series, and that discussion will be on race and criminal justice. So you can find more information on both of those events, as well as recordings of all of our past panel discussions at a link that I'm going to put in the chat right now. So thank you again to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we hope to see you at one of our future events.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Meneka.
everyone.
And yeah, nice to meet all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. It was great, and I enjoyed meeting you all as well.
Thanks, everyone.